Okay, Ling 441, I just want to walk you through the guidelines for the next course project report, which is going to be due on the 23rd of November, on Monday again as usual. So we're into week 12 of the class, getting close to the end. So this is a project report on the vowels of your consultant's language. I've got an example here of how to present your data using English as an example, with me as the supposed consultant of this project, using the vowels of my variety of English. So your first task for this course project report is to present the contrastive vowel sounds of your consultant's language in the form of an IPA style chart. You should present the vowel phonemes in terms of the front, back, and high-low dimensions used in the IPA's vowel charts as usual. So for English, your chart would look like the following, and these are my monophthongal vowels of English, including schwa as well, which is sort of not really contrastive for me. And I've got a section listed out here, which is enclosed in a dotted line, which I'm labeling as the round vowels in this variety of English. So you can point out which vowels in your chart are round versus not round. Usually the default is to have vowels not be rounded for reasons that we talked about in our lectures on why we get the specific vowel contrast we do in language based on how they're articulated and the relationship between articulation and acoustics. I don't need to go through all that again. For what you need to know for this project is that you should substantiate this chart with words in which these particular vowels appear and contrast with other vowels in your consultant's language. So ideally, these words should form minimal pairs with each other. So I've got some examples of minimal pairs here, actually minimal sets, like bead versus bid versus bed versus bad, so on and so forth, as English examples. And then, like, you already know what these words mean because you speak English, but like you'd have to translate your consultant's words into English. So that's what these are here for, as kind of placeholders for that dimension or aspect of your report. And I've also done this by contrasting among just the front vowels. So you could, come up with your vowel chart of like 5 or 10 vowels or however many there are in your consultant's language, and then just come up with a huge minimal set contrasting all of them. A lot of languages just have 5 vowels, so it's relatively easy to find like 5 vowels or 5 words which make a minimal set for those 5 vowels that only contrast in the particular vowels you're looking at. We saw that for like Spanish and Japanese and whatnot in the lecture a while back. I've done it just by looking at contrast, like feature by feature. So the front vowels are going to contrast with in height. So E is high, I is mid-high, as mid-low, as low, so on and so forth. So you can do that if you want to. This is showing you the back vowel contrast, like Luke versus look versus luck versus lock, so on and so forth. But you can only usually take that so far. So like Luke and look are rounded vowels, so there's actually two features which are contrasting there for those particular items. So whatever you do, clarify exactly what features are being contrasted when you present 2 different vowels in a contrast with one another in your report, please. And then I've got like contrast between vowels of different heights here. So the high vowels are leak and luke, and then that's front versus back and round, so on and so forth. Lack and lock is just front versus back, so on and so forth. So usually you should be able to present contrasts which are clear in terms of their phonetic features. Hopefully that's not too confusing, but the main point is that you're kind of presenting a theory here of what contrasts in the language based on this vowel chart. You need to substantiate that theory by showing me the evidence of contrast in your consultant's language. If you can't find perfect minimal pairs, that's okay. Shoot for perfect minimal pairs, but if you can't get them, at least show me the vowels in some forms that contrast with one another. If maybe they differ in 2 phonemes, that's great. If one of them is like the vowel phonemes, which are different between the 2, that's great. If you can just like get the vowels in any form at all, that's fine too. Just don't show me nothing. You have to show me something to prove that these vowels exist, because one of the things you're going to do on top of presenting the words is record your consultant saying those vowels in those words so that you can measure their form and frequencies. I've got a little point here about like phonological oddities for certain vowels. So like if it's hard to find contrast for certain vowels, Why is that? So like for my dialect of English, schwa only appears in unstressed syllables, and when other vowels appear in those unstressed syllables, they kind of often reduce to schwa. So it doesn't really, directly contrast with like a wedge for me. So yeah, to say that it's a contrastive vowel is a bit of a stretch. But so if you're including items in your vowel chart which are not really contrastive phonemes, make sure I know what's going on with those vowels and what you believe they do in the language. So don't just plop them down there like they're a phoneme like anything else. Say why they're not distinctive and where they do appear, like allophonically or for whatever phonological reason. So here's a note saying you can add other observations, like this vowel only exists in loan words, or this vowel only exists when there's a labial consonant right after it, so on and so forth. Yeah, if you don't understand everything that's going on in the language, that's fine. Again, just explain to me what you don't understand and what you think about it. But if you have noticed little oddities like that, it's totally fine to present that information too, because it's fun and it's interesting. That's why we're doing this, right? If your language has diphthongs, it's usually easier to present them in a separate chart, since diphthongs kind of by their nature move from one part of the vowel space to another, and therefore they don't simply contrast in terms of like single dimensions, right? Their dimensions are changing as they go. So I've got the English diphthongs here presented in a chart kind of as I envisioned this. So like A, I, ow, oi, and o, those five. And then you should present words in which you find these diphthongs in your consultant's language, like bade, bode, bide, bowed, boyd, so on and so forth. And you're going to have your consultant read these words too, and you will also make formant measurements of these guys. So that's the last part here. So record your consultant with prot as they produce the words in the example forms you list in your paper. Then measure F1 and F2 for each contrastive vowel in prot and present a graph of those measurements in your project report. You only need to make one set of measurements for each vowel phoneme. Last year when I did this, there were students who sent me like 3 or 4 or 5 repetitions of their consultant producing each vowel. That's kind of overkill. You really just need one good one, and then send me the acoustic measurements you get for the formants for those vowels, for the whatever tokens you send me. But you only need one vowel, you only need one set of measurements for that vowel category. When you create a graph, and I've got an example down here that I'll show you in a second, when you create your graph of the formant measurements, make sure each vowel is clearly labeled on the graph. You can plot it out by hand if you want to, or you can do it on Excel. I'd be happy to show you how to do that. And make sure the graph is oriented in the usual fashion for phonetics, with its origin on the upper right corner, with F1 increasing from top to bottom and F2 increasing from right to left. So I've got this example chart here with the origin up here. And oops, I mislabeled that. I'm going to have to fix this, but this should be F1 and this should be F2. I'm sorry about that. I'm not going to redo this video regardless. Down here, you get a blank chart you can use, which again is showing you F1 in this dimension and F2 in this dimension. This one's a little bit different from this Excel chart here, because this one shows you the frequencies in a logarithmic scale, which gets narrower and narrower as you go higher and higher in the scale in both dimensions, which is, as we'll find out, the way that our ears or our auditory systems process pitch. So that's why that exists as it does. It also kind of condensed some of these higher frequency contrasts a little bit in the vowel space when you plot it out on this graph. You can do it in the regular way though, in a graph like this. Just make sure you get these dimensions right. And just to cover up my trail, I'm going to just reiterate, this is F1, this is F2. Okay, I've also got diphthongs on this chart. So if the consultant's language, if your consultant's language includes diphthongs, then please plot the formant values of those diphthongs on the same chart. Or if you want to, if like you have 5 diphthongs like this, it gets messy in a hurry. So you can also just make a separate formant plot for the diphthongs by themselves. But for those diphthongs, calculate the formant values for the first half of the diphthong. So normally when you're calculating formant values, you take the midpoint of the vowel and then take kind of the middle frequency of each formant. You just need really F1 and F2, right? The idea behind getting the midpoint of the vowel is that that's the part of the vowel that's supposed to be as far away as possible from the consonants on either side of it, so it has kind of the least influence from whatever the consonants are doing to the formant frequencies. With a diphthong, you don't have that luxury. You kind of have to pick the first half and say, well, that's like the ah part of it, and the second half is like the e part of it. And then so you pick the middle of the first half for the first set of diphthong formant measurements, and then you pick the middle of the second half. So for the second set of formant measurements, it's kind of like a quarter of the way through the whole diphthong, and then a third, 3/4 of the way through the whole diphthong. Calculate your measurements that way. And then plot both sets of formant values on the vowel chart with an arrow connecting the two from beginning to end. So we've got arrows connecting the diphthongs here, are showing where they go in the vowel space. Down here, I've got an A and an O. This is actually from somebody's English formant measurements from a 341 class, but it works just the same. So this is where A starts, this is where it ends, this is where O starts, and this is where it ends, and the vowel just shows you how it goes through the space, right? The monophthongs here are just plotted as individual points, so those are from the midpoint measurements of the vowel, right? But it should look something like this. Again, get the dimensions labeled correctly, get the plot points measured or labeled correctly, and make sure you have an example of measurements for every single vowel you're presenting in the original chart for both your monophthongs and your diphthongs. And one thing you might learn from this is, like, if you get a chart like this from a grammar showing you that the language is supposed to have vowels in these positions, well, they might not be in the exact same positions when they're actually produced, or you might be losing some contrast you thought existed in the language when you see vowels plotted on top of each other in a formant space like this. Either way, I want to hear these vowels that you've recorded in the words that you're using as examples for those vowels, these guys down here. So send me those recordings, send me your plots, and then you should also write this up in like a brief exposition of what's going on in the language, like, oh, here are the vowel contrasts of language, whatever. And these are the formant measurements. So just kind of frame the whole thing, please, in prose. And then send me your recordings, your formant measurements, and your report. You can upload them to the Dropbox on D2L. You can send me an email too if you want to. I guess I got a note here. I should mention, like, if you made multiple recordings of the vowels in the language, then let me know which recording your measurements are coming from. Don't send me like 5 different recordings and then give me one measurement, because I want to double check that you're getting the measurements right? So it's best if you just send me one recording for each vowel and then one measurement for that vowel category. Hopefully that explains everything. You're also welcome to get in touch with me if you have questions anytime between now and when the assignment is due. And that's about it. So again, have fun, and I can't wait to see what you guys come up with.